Good morning, Ezra. Can you hear us?
I can hear you. Is it coming through okay on my end?
Yep, thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, good morning, everybody. It's 8 a.m. I'll call the meeting of the Madison Metropolitan Sewerage District Commission to order. This is a hybrid meeting. We've got so far Commissioner Meyer participating virtually, and has Commissioner Rummel signed in yet? Okay, so, and then we have a quorum. So we will move on to welcome to our guests. Oops, I gotta get out of the minutes here. And then, Janelle, would you like to go through the virtual meeting guidance, please?
Certainly. Good morning, commissioners, members of the public, and staff. To help us have a smooth meeting, we're going to review just a few decorum rules for all to please follow. First, some general information. For all those using phones in the room today, please ensure you are facing the mic and that it is 3 to 4 inches away when speaking. This allows our virtual people to be able to hear us. Second, please make sure that your mic is muted if you're at the table, if you're not speaking. And as a reminder, the public chat has been disabled, but you can still send messages to the meeting host, and this meeting is being recorded and streamed live on YouTube. With that, we also have a couple other just housekeeping tasks today since we have a public hearing. So for all those who are registered guests, we have a 5-minute opportunity to speak. For guests who are providing their comments, I don't believe we have anybody in the room today, but for our virtual guests who would like to speak, please send the meeting host a heads up that you'd like to speak. Again, please send the meeting host a message saying that you're at the public hearing. For those guests that are speaking. We'll give you a 30-second reminder at the end to wrap it up, but it doesn't look like we have too many on with us today. And please note that no public comments are going to be accepted in chat. You must speak your comment. So with that, let's have a great meeting, everyone, and welcome.
Okay, thank you, Janelle. Michael, any announcements?
No announcements this morning.
Okay, appearances by the public. Do we have anybody from the public in the room or online that wishes to make an appearance but's not speaking? But if you're wanting to be on the budget, wait for that item. So anybody else on any other item other than the budget? Don't see anybody? Okay, so we'll move on. The consent calendar, we have the meeting, the last meeting. We have the operating fund and review and approval of sanitary sewer extension plans. There's 3 of them. City of Verona, 2 in City of Madison, then a reconstruction, pump station 17. There's acceptance of work for the West Interceptor extension repairs and the approved transaction amount and professional services for the flow splitter improvements and acceptance of work Lower Badger Mill Creek Interceptor 5A days. Do we have any questions in any of those before we get a motion? Who wants to make a motion?
It's Wilson. I want to make sure I'm close enough to the mic. I'll move approval of the items on the consent agenda.
Okay. Motion by Commissioner Wilson, second by?
Second, Commissioner Meyer.
Second by Commissioner Meyer. Okay, so we have a motion
Sorry,
by
sir.
Commissioner Wilson, by Commissioner Meyer to approve the consent calendar. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. And anybody opposed? None. Motion carries. Okay, thank you, everybody. That will move us to item 4A, public hearing and discussion on the 2024 proposed operating capital projects and debt service budgets. We'll first have a presentation by Bill and Michael, and then we'll move into public comments. And then at that point, I'll open the public hearing right before the public comments.
That's good.
So you guys want to make your presentation?
I'll start. I'll be making a general presentation. Commissioners and member of the public, my name is Michael Muka. I am the Chief Engineer and Director, Madison Metropolitan Sewerage District. And I'd like to provide some key points on this budget document. And Commissioners, you've heard these key points before. Members of owner communities and last week heard these key points in a presentation I made. But this meeting is taped, and there's members of the public that may want to review this. And so I'm going to give a full presentation today. And then we will open it up, as President Hubble said, for a public hearing. And our document with all the details is listed on our website. Here's the link on my first sewer.org 2024 budget. There is a serious problem that needs to be addressed. I've been sharing this with you. We are facing significant infrastructure challenges to meet growing community needs. Our community is growing. There's more wastewater needs to be managed. We are needing even higher and stringent regulations and regulatory requirements, and those are always changing and always becoming more stringent. And we have to ensure reliable service, even in the face of extreme weather and climate change. Bottom line is that this budget recommends increases in spending for capital projects. This is consistent with what I've been telling the Commission and owner communities since 2021. I have visited with many city councils, village boards, to share that we are building a bigger budget so we can afford our infrastructure, and the spending that we have anticipated since 2021 is now coming due. We are the right entity to address this, and it would be responsible for us to not address it. We were in 30 to address wastewater challenges on behalf of our owner communities. This is very specialized work and requires specialized expertise, and those needs and the expertise we need is always changing and growing. We are going about this budget in 2024 and moving forward in a sensible, reasonable, and responsible way. This budget is implementing plans the Commission has either approved or accepted. Going back to 2009, when the Commission approved the 50-year master plan, which had extensive owner community engagement, which committed our efforts to this treatment plant and maintaining this treatment plant for the long term. This implements our collection system facility plan that 2022, our liquid processing facility plan in 2017, and our energy master plan in 2021. This budget also factors in macroeconomic headwinds that we are facing, with significant increases in inflation, cost of borrowing, and decline in connection charge revenue. Finally, we have listened to our owner communities and we have heard their concerns. We have engaged communities in areas through multi-year efforts, through the inflow and infiltration work group, through the fiscal work group, to look at how we can manage our rates and communicate our rates and make and address interests. And also early owner meetings where we discuss economic drivers, budgets, projects, and other things. So we understand and we have heard from our owners, and we're taking that into effect with everything we're doing with this budget moving forward. To click the next slide here. Amanda, could you help me, please? Thank you. As I shared with you, this is a do more budget to build capacity. The Commission established a strategic plan with performance areas and focus items are things we need to continue to enhance and do better at, such as equity, climate change, workforce development, and that is factored into this budget. Productivity, and for us to be very efficient in our work, our Enterprise Resource Planning System, or ERP, something the Commission will be hearing more about in the very near future, is going to be integral to every business operation we have. It's a multi-year effort and will create enormous efficiencies for us and effectiveness. Our CIP addresses aging infrastructure, capacity, and regulatory compliance, and of course addresses reliability as well. And of course, we're investing in our people, because without the expertise of our people, we can't do anything or get anything done. We are a regional infrastructure provider, and we do not have a choice what regulations we abide by and which we do not. Every year, the Commission receives a report from me, from our staff, called the Compliance Maintenance Annual Report, where we are making and doing on requirements in many, and the DNR requires us to do this, and we commit to infrastructure enhancements and changing our operations to address items and issues we see. We have to be have around-the-clock reliability. Failure is not an option. Some of you may remember several years ago, we had the only major overflow event at one of our pumping stations many years ago. And 3 of our electrical feeds failed at the same time during a major storm event. It was unheard of. And I remember going to the town of Dunn. They were downstream of this overflow event, and Ed Minahan, he rests in peace. The board member said to me, "Oh, could you let this happen?" And that, to me, expressed the importance of failure is not an option for us. And will we be successful all the time? No, we will have problems, but we have to do everything within our power to make sure we do not have sewage in basements, we do not have major overflow events, and we do everything we can. And that's built in to this budget. Many of my colleagues around the country, they have support for rate increases because they see everyday problems with the sewage system. Our system is running well because of it's maintained well and managed well. And so sometimes it's hard to see why do we need more when things seem to be going so well. And it's because of the success of this commission investing in our budget every year and doing that. Then, of course, community, major part of this. Out, Amanda. Thank you. At the end of the day, a household will be paying $260 some a year to have the benefit of not having to worry about raw wastewater in their environment, in their swimming, in their lakes, or in their basements. And the cost of that is $22 more a year. A lot of our work is unseen, and the people that do the work are doing it with behind the scenes every day. When COVID started, we didn't know how that would impact people, COVID. And staff still in the sewers every day, and we're in wastewater every day, even though we had the issues with COVID. Going to move forward. You could see our service charge changes here for this budget, which amount to a 9% increase, including things that we have no choice over, which are this about $3.6 million in terms of things we need, and things we need to increase in terms of meeting our needs. A couple years ago, in order to keep rates low, I decided to defer maintenance of some of our tanks, save money. And we came back to it the next year, and in 2022, and you may recall, cost us $1 million. So the problem doesn't go away, and that was one factor that led to us needing a change and amendment to our expenditure authority for the 2022 budget. We don't want to do that anymore, and when we looked at our budget for 2024 and in future years, we said we need to be honest about the costs, maintain and operate our system, and we need to make sure we're investing in our infrastructure, not just now, but for the future generations. We give tours of young people, and there was a slide that flashed past you really quickly. Those young people we have in tours today, they'll be grown up. They'll be grown-ups, and we're still paying the debt on some of the projects that we put in this year. The decision young people make when they grow up will impact our service charges in the future by what they put down the toilet and don't put down. We are investing not only in hard infrastructure, but in the people infrastructure. And in the future, through our work at Shop One, all of our communication efforts are all geared to working with our community about how they can interact with us and what they can and how they can make our jobs easier. Seeing this benchmark, we look at what our costs are. This includes the collection system charges for the city of Madison. And so at the end of the day, for complete costs for collection and treatment of wastewater from a household is about $400 a year. It's been trending up like the national average. So we're not out of step with what the industry as a whole has been experiencing. We're experiencing the issues we are. is we can, the timeline is we can receive written comments until October 5th. We will receive some initial deliberation from the commission today. Then we will receive more on the 12th of October. And then you will adopt, we'll take your feedback and guidance, and you will adopt our 2024 budget on October 26th and our service charges. And we'll notify owner communities. So with that, President Howell, you can take it over for the public hearing.
Okay, thank you. At this point, we'll open the public hearing. Do we have anybody in the room that wishes to speak? And then I'll go online. I don't see anybody in the room that wishes to speak. Does anybody online wish to speak? We have nobody that indicated in chat that they wish to speak? Okay, so I'll ask again, anybody online wish to speak? And a third time, anybody online wish to speak? Okay, seeing that nobody wishes to speak, I think then we'll close the public hearing. And we do have it identified as discussion. Does anybody have any items they wish to bring up, realizing that this would be preliminary and that the next meeting will have a more in-depth discussion after written comments are received? Tom?
Just a couple things. Just a couple things. One, we did get a communication from the Wanakee Utilities Director, just concerned, I think, about the increase in general and continuing for a while. And Michael responded to him and did a nice response. And I don't know if there was any follow-up from Tim Herlitzka or not. I didn't get any. And then I got a call yesterday from the administrator in Wanakee, and I did call him right back, but I didn't hear anything. So I don't know if he was bringing it. He just said regarding MMSD, but don't know if there was a concern there or not because I didn't get the call. So the next meeting, I may get a chance to talk with him, but I just wanted to point those couple things out, which I wasn't at the last Wisconsin Towns or Dane County Towns Association meeting. However, I did advise them the budget was available, and I was told by Renee Lauber, who's the executive director, that no one raised any concerns about the budget, but they were concerned about PFAS, and mainly Metro Growth, of course, being rural. So I just wanted to let everybody know that it did have a couple conversations with people about things, and thanks.
Okay, thank you, Tom. Anybody else have anything to add for the good of the order before we move on? Any commissioners online have anything they wish to say?
No, thanks, Tom.
No.
Okay. Okay, good. So that will mean that we will move on from this item to the PFAS discussion or study session. Marty, you're going to do the presentation?
Yes, thanks, Commissioner. Hello, Michael. I can. Did work. Well, good morning, everybody. My name is Marty Griffin. I'm Director of Ecosystem Services here at the district. So today I'm going to give a presentation summary of our results of our continuing characterization of PFAS that we've conducted as phase 2 that occurred in the 2022 calendar year of our PFAS sampling and analysis plan. So I'll give a little brief background and then get into some of the data, some of the conclusions, then open it up for questions. So really, why do we care about PFAS? Well, PFAS, just so everyone knows, on the same page here, covers thousands of substances. PFAS isn't just one thing. They're organic substances. And so within this family of thousands of compounds, some are well studied, like PFOA and PFOS you may have heard of, but others really aren't. So our knowledge of PFAS really is still evolving at this time. And one example of this rapidly evolving knowledge is that we now know that they're actually manufactured precursors to PFAS. They're not actually PFAS themselves, but they're less stable compounds, and they can undergo transformation or degradation and actually turn into these PFAS compounds through certain biological or abiotic processes. So, you know, there's a lot of things going on when you talk about PFAS. But our main concern really about PFAS compounds is that they don't degrade in the environment and they're bioaccumulative. And so the variation in the thousands of compounds, like the length of the chain structure, the chemical structure, they have a wide-ranging impacts on how these compounds behave in the environment and actually when humans come into contact with them. So there's really two ways we come into contact with PFAS as humans. That's eating food that was maybe packaged in material that contains PFAS or drinking contaminated water. Additional contact through PFAS could be through consumer products like nonstick cookware, stain-resistant carpeting, things like that. So as a result of all these types and different uses of PFAS compounds in our environment, they're present everywhere. Everywhere you look, you can find them. So how did the district fit into this PFAS story that I just sort of summarized? We're a wastewater utility, so we're not a source of PFAS, but we do reflect the communities we serve. So you can see by this graphic that we're in the middle circle of the cycle, but we're part of the cycle. So we receive the compounds. And since we can't treat for PFAS, you can see that they move right back out to the outer circle and potentially in the environment. So it's really critical for us as a wastewater utility to understand our role in the center of the circle and how we're part of this bigger cycle and circle that you see on the screen. So in 2019, we started our action plan around PFAS, and that was a way to identify the district to be proactive and position us favorably to respond to any mandated PFAS actions that may come down. And so up to this point, up to 2023, we've done some key things as part of this action plan. The first thing we did is complete a review of the district authority to control PFAS received by the plant through our sewer use ordinance. And so our sewer use ordinance does give us authority to regulate discharges that could cause us to violate our permit, interfere with plant operations, impact safety, affect our resource recovery and reuse products or processes, or create some condition that would be unacceptable to our regulatory agency. What the sewers ordinance does not do is really give us a specific basis to say we can regulate PFAS at a specific concentration level. So we have a little bit of authority but not complete authority. The other thing we did as part of our action plan is hire a consultant to complete a fate and transport review, and that was specific to the district processes and recovery resources. The idea behind that fate and transport review was to give us a baseline understanding of how we should expect PFAS to behave in our treatment plant setting, but also how the district fits in that bigger circle I showed earlier within the community, and where our gaps in knowledge and understanding are when we look at how PFAS moves around that circle. So, you know, one of the gaps is, you know, what are the potential PFAS sources to the plant based on the makeup of our service area? That was some information that the fate and transport review identified as a gap. One of the conclusions of the review was that, you know, we found detectable levels of PFAS that will be anticipated in our products because we know that the community uses PFAS and that it would come to us. But the review did highlight that we do not have any highly concentrated industrial sources of PFAS. We don't have sources in our service area that we would expect to come to our plant. So we learned a little bit about what we'd expect based on the makeup of our service area when it comes to PFAS. When we talk about our pre-treatment program, we're working directly with these industrial users. So even though we don't have a specific industrial source, we do have business sectors or industrial users that could be using PFAS. While none of them are specific manufacturers of the compounds, they may use them in their processes. So what we did is did a review of our significant industrial users of the business sector categories to understand what the potential and probability would be of those entities to use PFAS. And so we conducted that review and found, again, and verified that there were no manufacturers of PFAS. but we're still gathering information and reaching out to understand the potential of just the use of PFAS in industrial processes. We're doing that through the form of a survey and questionnaire that we've talked to our industrial users, and we're getting information back. The other thing we're doing is during our permit renewal process for our industrial users that are known to be potential sources, we're putting them on notice, so to speak, and saying, okay, as an industrial user, you're required to monitor and look at certain compounds for us to make sure we're protecting the treatment plant. Well, now we're telling those folks that you have the potential now to be looking at PFAS as one of these compounds. So don't be surprised in the future if your permits have monitoring around these types of compounds. Starting that conversation, making sure our industrial users are aware that this is a concern for us, and so that they'll be ready to work with us to gather that information. So we're sort of building the conversation with our industrial users to sort of make sure we're on this good path to get best practices with that group. The other thing we did is maintaining a public website. You can see the website address up there, madsewerpfasinitiative.org. And so that was really to make sure that as we talk and have these conversations, there's proper context around what we're talking about to make sure that we're not talking in a vacuum, but we're really understanding that circle I showed earlier with the utility's role and how we're a part of that. The last two things here are sampling plan and our testing. We started a phased sampling plan. So we started our sampling plan in 2021 once we were able to have Wisconsin certified laboratories to test for these compounds. And then today I'm going to talk to you about our completion of phase 2. So we started our sampling in 2021. We continued it in 2022. Just an overview of the timeline of what was happening in those years. So 2021, I said that we got our certified laboratories. That was a snapshot to get a baseline of understanding. That was one sample at one time. In 2022, we wanted to get more information. We wanted to continue to close those data gaps identified earlier. So we expanded that snapshot to be more of monthly and quarterly testing. We also expanded it to look at different process points in our biosolids handling to get a better understanding of how PFAS works with the different biosolids products that we produce. So 2022 really was expanding our influent and effluent testing to be more temporal. We were expanding our biosolids sampling to also be more temporal. And then we also added these characterization of handling in our processes to understand how PFAS works in those types of digestion and things like that. That's part of our handling process. The other thing I want to point out as part of 2022, as part of our baseline phase, is that we also looked deeper into acceptance of PFAS-containing wastewater. So as part of our operations here, we do accept wastewater that doesn't come through the magical highway of our collection system. It comes as hauled waste. We also have requests monthly, weekly, all throughout the year about receiving temporary waste. Maybe we have a temporary discharge. Maybe it's not permanent, but it's going to happen as part of construction. And so looking at what I call above our baseline, right, things that don't happen all the time, but they come in once in a while, kind of looking at how does accepting those types of waste, if they contain PFAS, impact our effluent. So that was another tool that we were able to create in 2022. So I'm going to go quickly through what we learned from the first sampling, just 2 slides, just to orient ourselves before we jump into the 2022 data. So again, phase 1 in 2021 was really just a snapshot to get this baseline knowledge. What's coming to us, what's in the stuff we use, and what's leaving the plant. And we found that what's coming to us was exactly what was going to be outlined in our fate and transport review. Stuff coming to us is what we expect. Stuff leaving is below, at the time in 2021 when we did the sampling, was below the proposed standards. Those standards are now codified. That's why I have proposed in parentheses. But at the time that this data was collected, those were proposed standards. One interesting thing that I want to point out, because the theme is going to come back later, is that our effluent PFAS concentrations are higher than our influent. So something is happening there. And our 2022 data that I'll show later will help explain some of that. When you move on to biosolids, we have a lot of good news. You know, in the polymer that we use for our solids handling, we found no PFAS. That's a great thing. So we're not adding PFAS into the processes we use. When we talk about what's leaving the plant, we have our struvite material. We found that there was no PFAS on that either, so that's a great thing. We're not creating products that go out with PFAS. But we did have PFAS in our biosolids. That's exactly what the Fate and Transport Review did predict based on the makeup of our service area. You can see that clearly with our phase one, that we have more PFAS in our Class A biosolid product than we have in our Class B product. Class B product is the MetroGo product, and our Class A product is a cake material. So that was our snapshot from 2021. Sample taken in 1 month, this is what we found. So moving on to the next year in 2022, we wanted to build upon that snapshot that we found in 2021. So we wanted to close some of the knowledge gaps. We saw that graph, the difference between Class A and Class B biosolids. We wanted to continue sampling and figure out, maybe answer the question, why were those differences there? The other thing is we just had a snapshot of what's coming to us through our influent. And so we do know that we have multiple force mains coming in. We wanted to get a little bit deeper to understand, are there actually differences in the different force main influent that comes in instead of just overall? And then, of course, with our temporal analysis in 2022, we wanted to assess whether there are differences in what's coming to a plant and our influent, and what's leaving our plant and our effluent over time, right? The 2021 data was just a snapshot. It was hard for us to understand if that was really what's happening throughout the year. And again, I mentioned this waste evaluation tool to help us understand what we receive and approve to receive outside of our baseline. All right, so now I'm going to get into the data. So hopefully if you have questions, we can write them down and we can answer them at the end, get through the data part. The first thing I want to mention for our influent is that we do have multiple force mains. So I just threw this graphic up so everyone understands that we have 5 force mains coming to the plant, and those 5 force mains correspond to specific pumping stations, okay? So some of the data I'm going to show is a way we treated those force main data. Some of the data I'm going to show are you're going to see individual force main information, but some of the data I'm going to show is going to be a way we were able to combine the force main information. All right, so this first table is a combined table of our influent coming in. So what we're able to do is understand the flow rates of each of the force mains coming in, and we can do a calculated average based on that flow rate. So it's sort of like a flow-weighted combined number. So you'll see for each month we just have one number, and that's because this is a flow rate calculated average number for that month for those samples of all the force mains put together. So you can think of this table as what I call like the calculated combined force main table, okay? I'm showing PFOA and PFOS, the 2 compounds that we're currently regulated for, and so this is our monthly data. It's hard to actually see the numbers here in the screen, I'm noticing, but that's okay. I'm going to show the data in a couple different ways. But the most important thing here to show is that the numbers are pretty consistent. This is what's coming into the plant. Yes, we see a little bit of variability, but remember what our units are. We're talking about parts per trillion, okay? So parts per trillion is a very, very small number. So when you talk about very small numbers and you see deviations of like 1 part per trillion, 2 part per trillion, 3 parts per trillion, that is a very, very, very small difference. It's almost like no difference, but it is a slight difference. So when I say numbers are fairly consistent, and you'll hear that theme, it doesn't mean there's no variation. It just means there's no large deviation that we would expect. The last column here is a little bit of context. This is a study that was done in Michigan of over 40 treatment plants in the state at looking at their influent wastewater. So it's probably one of the most comprehensive studies of what comes to wastewater treatment plants that cover all different types of service areas. So it's nice to look at our numbers and put it in context of studies that show what do we typically expect to see coming into the plant. This next graphic is actually not just PFOA and PFOS, but actually all of the PFAS compounds we tested for. We tested for 33 different PFAS compounds because those are the PFAS compounds that were identified by the Department of Health and the DNR as the compounds that they're actively looking at right now. So we tested for 33 PFAS compounds. The colors represent all the different compounds, okay? So you're not expected to see the numbers. Really, this is a graph for you to see colors, all right? And so again, this is the combined calculated flow-weighted average. So this is each of the bars represents 1 month, and this is all the PFAS we're getting in that month. When I tell you to focus on the colors, you can see on that leftmost bar, I put a couple squares around of the dark blue and that sort of darker orange. That represents PFOA and PFOS. The way you look at these graphs is that if you're interested in one specific compound, you look at how large that tiny box is within that colorful mix, and you can track that box across time. So for instance, if you wanted to look at the blue box, which I believe is PFOA, you can track the size of that box across time and see exactly what that table showed you in that first graph, right? Not much variation over time. The one thing I do want to point out is you notice on the far right of the graph, the bars all of a sudden spike up and get super huge. What's going on there? Well, the first thing you need to look at is the actual bar getting bigger, or is there one specific color that looks to be driving that? In this particular case, it's one particular color. It's this light blue color. And it stands for an acronym that I'm going to get wrong, so I'm not going to say it, but it's like PPFP something, right? And what we found was that when we looked at our effluent data to say, what's going on here? Is this actually more of that PFPF, whatever I'm butchering right now? And we didn't see it there. And so we attributed this large spike to actually be sample contamination. If you look at where that particular compound is mostly found, it's found in basically all products that we use everywhere. And so there's some of our QA/QC checks. We identified this was probably sample contamination. So I keep this up here just to show that, science isn't always clean. Sometimes things get messy. And when we're talking about very, very small amounts, parts per trillion, it doesn't take much to contaminate a sample. So that's okay, it happens. We're on the cutting edge of sampling, so this is just up here to reflect that. That's what's coming into the plant. This graph here, we're switching gears. We're switching now to see all the different force mains coming in, okay? So each line that's a color is a different force main. So I show you that map, you understand what that means. We have 5 force mains coming in. The main takeaway from these is that you can see the pattern is the same, okay? Even though some force mains may appear to have higher PFAS coming in, some are higher than others, again, that variation is very small, it's very low. If you look at it, you can't really see the numbers, but it's about a deviation of 2 to 4 part per trillion, which isn't very much. But the pattern is the same, which means we can't really say there's one particular source coming from one particular force main that's sort of abnormally different than all the others. So it was interesting information for us. And you can see the pattern's the same for PFOA and PFOS coming into the plant. I thought that was a pretty interesting way to illustrate that what's coming from our service area, you can see that it's all pretty much the same. So in summary on what's coming to the plant, we have pretty consistent data. PFOA is generally lower than PFOS when you look at the numbers. And we don't really have a single continuous source coming in from one of our force mains that we can point to and say, oh, that's really driving our PFAS numbers. The other thing I mentioned is you saw those different colors on those bar graphs with all those different PFAS compounds of the 33. We're actually able to group each of those 33 compounds into certain compounds that we know are found in known PFAS-containing materials, like, for instance, firefighting foam and things like that. So we can sort of use some of those compounds as indicators to say, okay, if we have a spike in this type of PFAS compound, maybe that says that we have some unknown source like firefighting foam coming in. We didn't see that. You didn't see a specific spike of one compound. So we really didn't see a spike of an indicated compound at a high enough concentration for us to say, okay, that's beyond baseline, that's beyond residential or commercial. This is something that's coming to us. So that's good news. All right, take a pause here while we get to our effluents. That was what's coming to the plant. I just want to remind everybody that we have no regulations on what's coming to the plant. That's just part of the circle, and that's part of the story for us to understand. So then when we look at what's leaving the plant, we can better understand what's happening. I'm going to switch the treated effluent to what's actually leaving the plant. All right, same table again. Monthly data from what's leaving the plant. Now, what's leaving the plant only leaves in one pipe. We have one effluent stream, so we don't have the need for any flow-weighted averaging or combining of different waters. So these numbers here are just straight-up sample numbers for what's leaving the plant from the effluent return pipes, okay, every month. Again, hard to see all the numbers, but the takeaway is that they're pretty consistent. Yes, we see some variation, and we see some high numbers, but that is what it is. The one thing I will point out is that we do have a high number in September. It says 11. Again, not a big variation from March. It's only like 2 parts per trillion, but it is the highest number we saw. And we were kind of wondering what's going on with that. Why would we have a little spike there? And actually, we found out in September in 2022, we had super high flows. So we found that we could correlate that higher number to just the fact that we had a lot more water coming in and leaving the plant. And we did actually see that same spike, if you recall, from the influent data around that same. The other thing I'll point out here on the table is the Wisconsin regulatory standards. So now we do have on the books Wisconsin administrative rule that talks about specific requirements for discharges for treatment plants for PFOA and PFOS. So you can see for PFOA and PFOS what the standards are, and not one time in any of the months we exceeded that standard. And actually, we're pretty far away from it in terms of part per trillion, right? So if you look at our lowest standard for PFOS, which is 8 parts per trillion, we didn't get very close to it at all. That's really good news. So based on the makeup of our service area and what's coming to us, we seem to be in a good position to meet regulatory standards when it comes to PFOA and PFOS. Again, looking at that exact same table in this colorful chart way, this is all the PFAS. So that first table I showed was just PFOA and PFOS. Now we're looking at all 33 compounds. Again, we see pretty consistent levels leaving the plant. We have that one spike you see, that's going to be the September sample. You see the highest one. But again, if you track these colors across time, it's pretty consistent. That big blue box doesn't really get bigger or smaller. It stays pretty consistent. That's really good for us to know. This is the same data for just PFOA and PFOS in a line graph format over time. So when I said it was really hard to read those numbers on the screen, this is a visual way to see those numbers to sort of say how much they're deviating from each other. Again, you see that spike in September, and you don't see, much deviation. Yes, there's some variation, but not a lot. And I put for PFOS, the state standard is that dashed line up above, so you can see how really far below we actually are. When I stated that we're below the 8, well, you can see visually that we're below the 8, and we're not like approaching, getting close to it. And actually, in the temporal data, the variability shows that it spikes but also goes down, but still pretty consistent. So we're in good shape when it comes to our treated effluent and meeting the current state standards. So to recap that, again, we're below water quality standards. That's important. Yes, now we know with our temporal sampling that PFAS, especially PFOA and PFOS, does differ from month to month. And we also show that if you were to overlay the influent graphs that I showed over the effluent graphs, you would see a similar pattern. So what's coming to us from the community, even though there is some transformation happening in terms of the amounts and concentrations, they all sort of change in the same way. So the levels that come to us in our influent does in fact impact our effluent. And that's important to know because when you talk about source reduction, pollution prevention, you want to know if that stuff's actually going to work. And so looking at our data, it seems like it really will. And again, PFOS is going to be lower than PFOA in that data. So we'll do a little comparison between what's coming in and what's going out, kind of give a preview. The top bars in the orange is what's coming in, and the bottom bars is what's going out. So when I talked about you can overlay our influent or effluent to understand, you can see that the pattern is the same. For the groupings that you can't read, sort of compare the top and the bottom, and you can say, okay, well, it looks like stuff's coming in and stuff's going out, right? I think what we want to look here is the absence of color. So I did highlight PFOA and PFOS in those highlighted bars, so you can sort of see that what's coming in for one compound is higher leaving, but for another compound it's lower leaving, right? I talked about PFOS and PFOA. But if you look to the far right of the graph, okay, there's a lot more orange at the top than blue at the bottom, right? So what's going on there? Why are there some compounds that looks like they're coming in but maybe not leaving? What's happening there is that transformation I talked about, those precursors and things. So some of the orange bars on the right side of the graph are considered in that precursor family. And so when they come into the plant, they transform, partition, and move, and we're thinking that they move to the solids side, and that's why you don't see them on the water side coming out of our effluent. So this is just another illustration of the complexity of these PFAS compounds, that just because it's coming in, it doesn't mean it's going to go out in your effluent. Maybe it's going to transform or partition and go to the solids, or something else is happening. So this is a good illustration of that. When we're looking at our influent and effluent, PFOA is higher in effluent, PFOS is lower in our effluent. That was, you can see that on those stacked colors. And those precursors I talked about definitely impacts what we see in our effluent. So it's something that we weren't 100% sure about with our snapshot data, but now we're definitely sure about with our temporal data. So that's good information for us to know about when we're talking about what to expect from things coming in and how that relates to what's leaving the plant. All right, switch gears to biosolids. The first thing I'll mention is that we're no longer talking about parts per trillion. We're talking about parts per billion. So a little bit different, but still very small quantities. The first thing I mentioned, actually, I'll go back to the slide. We do have two biosolids products. We have our Class B liquid Metrogrow, which is in that container in the picture, but you also have our Class A cake material. So our Metrogrow material, you know, it's about 30-something% liquid, or solids, I'm sorry, and our cake material is like more, sorry, misspoke. Our cake material is about 30% solid, and our Metrogrow liquid material is about 5% solid. So that's the difference. And if you recall what I just mentioned about partitioning and transformation, I said that precursors may transform and change in the PFAS compounds that move to the solid side. So clearly there's PFAS compounds that like liquid, and there's PFAS compounds that like solid. So I'm mentioning that here because when I get into the data about biosolids, it's important to know how much liquid is in these biosolids. So again, our Metrogrow is only about 5% solid, so it's pretty much liquid. And if you look at our cake material, it's 30% solid, so it's a lot more solid material. So we can start with our Class A cake material, our more solid material. And you can see that our PFAS varies over time, right? But actually is pretty tight to itself. So PFOA and PFOS do show a difference. And the reason why we see a higher PFOA than PFOS is the types of material it likes to stick to, right? So the blue line, which I believe is PFOA, I can't read it from here, likes to be more in the solids phase, right? So that's why you see a spike there versus PFOA. But I'm showing both compounds there on the same graph. You can see how they relate. And the interesting thing about our Class A cake is something I have to tell you is a little story. So if you notice this graph, it tracks pretty good early in the year and then deviates later as we go on in the year. And that's because the way we process our Class A cake is that it comes off after it's dried, and we have to use a time temperature process to wait for it to be eligible to be clear for distribution. So the cake actually sits in a pile over time waiting for that. And so what we did is we sampled right away when it comes off, the fresh cake, and then we kept sampling that same pile over time. That's our temporal series, because we wanted to understand what happens to the PFAS as we do this process before we are able to distribute it. You can see very clearly that something's happening over time with our Class A cake, okay? And what we did is we were able to look at some other analysis called top assay analysis, which really focuses in on those precursors. Top assay analysis actually forces transformation so you can take measurements to understand if that's actually what's happening. And that's what we did here, and that's what we found. So we did find that over time, as that cake sits, additional transformations are occurring, which impacts PFAS, which is important for us to know because this is one product that we have, and it's good to know how our process for making sure the product is cleared for distribution under regulations impacts how PFAS occurs within that product. So having a temporal series for Class A cake was very important for us to have, so this is good information. As conversely, you can see our Class B Metrogrow liquid, pretty much a straight line, right? So a lot of liquid there. We're not having as much transformation. Probably all the things that were going to be transformed did and went into our effluent, so you're not going to see it much here in our Class B Metrogrow. That's why this line is much straighter and not spikier. So there's a big difference between the types of products we create. And this information is really important for us to know, especially as we look toward the future of biosolids and what types of products we may look at having in the future. Obviously, a product with less liquid may have different impacts on PFAS than one with more. So this is really good information for us to have as we look to make those types of decisions in the future. Again, we get the nice, colorful graph, but I'm showing this up here not to show the data in a different way, but to show you some new additional data. So the two ends where I have labeled Class B Metrogrow and Class A cake, that's for all the compounds, but it's the same data you just saw, right? So again, if you would follow one of the blue or orange colors across, it'll track exactly like you saw in those line graphs. But what I want to call your attention to is those two middle bars. So this is where we did our process samples. So when we talk about how we create our Class B Metrogrow, right, it gets dewatered on the gravity belt thickener, and that's where we take our samples for our Class B Metrogrow. But then to get to Class A, there's a couple other steps, which includes an additional digestion. So it's a thermophilic digestion process. So those two middle bars is the material before it hits the thermophilic digestion. The second bar next to it is right after it comes out of thermophilic digestion. Our bar to the right, labeled Class A cake, again, that's that pile that we talked about that we have this processing for. So interestingly, our thermophilic digestion has an impact on PFAS amounts. And clearly through our top ASA analysis, this is because of transformation and partitioning. If you want to get deep into it, I can later, but typically for the top assay, when you're forcing transformations, it's an intense oxidization is what you do, which is basically super, super, super high heat. What is thermophilic digestion? It has a very, very high heat component. So we're essentially simulating that, but in real time as part of our processes. So this was something theoretically we thought was possible or would happen if we looked at the data, but we didn't have the data to confirm it. But now we do know that when we look at how we make our products, the processes in which we use does have an impact on PFAS. That's important for us to know moving forward. So that's what this graph is illustrating. The one thing I do want to point out, though, is that if you do look at the colored bars and you track them over time, it impacts certain PFAS compounds more than others. And so that's something that we haven't looked into because we're focusing on PFOA and PFOS, but just something I want to draw attention to, that not all PFAS compounds sort of react equally when you talk about this additional thermophilic digestion. This is another table showing data that you've already seen, except I have one new piece of information highlighted in orange. And so I wanted to draw attention to this because when we talk about biosolids regulation, there currently is no regulation in Wisconsin. What we have is a draft interim guidance from DNR that's created threshold buckets for impacts to how you land apply or not land apply biosolids. And so the threshold limits are predicated upon the combined median of PFOA and PFOS combined. So you can take our monthly data and create a median number for the year for PFOA and PFOS, and you then combine those two numbers to get your combined median, okay? And so For our Class B metric, our combined median is about 8.8, and for our Class A cake, it's around 35. When we talk about the DNR interim draft biosolids guidelines, if you're below 20, status quo. Everything's considered to be fine. You don't have to make any changes. So for Class B Metro, clearly our combined median is below 20, so we're acceptable to be land applying based on this draft interim guidelines from DNR. When you look at our Class A cake, however, we are above that 20, right? But the second threshold that kicks in is 50. So we're between the 20 and the 50 for our Class A cake. What that means in the draft interim guidance from DNR is that kicks in some notification, testing, tracking, and reporting requirements. It doesn't change anything about application rates, doesn't change anything about actually being land applied. It talks about you must now test your effluent, which we're already doing. It talks about now you must notify your landowners and tell them about the PFAS in the product, which we're already doing, right? So a lot of the things that the DNR requirements now in the draft interim guidance are things we're already doing, but I did want everyone to be aware that that is out there. We do have data, and this is where we fall into that threshold that's identified in that draft interim guidance from DNR. To summarize what's going on with biosolids, again, consistent over time, which is what we'd expect from the makeup of our service area and what we'd expect from our fate and transport review that talks about how different PFAS compounds move from solids to liquids. Consistent during the handling process, right? If you notice, as it comes off the gravity belt thickener, but then heads into the thermophilic digester, it looks pretty similar. Came out of thermophilic digestion, but then we have it sit in the pile, looks pretty similar, right? It's that middle part that we saw the changes. So I say that's being pretty consistent. Our Class A cake does have higher PFAS compounds, especially PFOA and PFOS, than our Class B Metro product. But again, I do want to reiterate that those levels are below any type of threshold to impact any type of land application. So the overall summarize from everything we just saw between our water and our solids, okay, we had our snapshot in 2021. We expanded that in 2022 for our temporal sampling. No surprises. That's a good thing. The levels continue to be as we expected. The types of PFAS compounds, looking at the full 33, right? We didn't see any things that popped out like, oh, here's an identifier or something unique that we need to look at. There was no sort of finger pointing in that respect. We're below state surface water standards, and that's a good thing. The way DNR is administrating those state surface water standards is as wastewater treatment permits are up for reissuance, those standards will come into the permit. Our permit is slated for reissuance in 2025, which means we start the reissuance process in 2024. So after 2025, we will have PFOA and PFOS standards in our permit. But the good news is based on our sampling that we've already done and the information we have, we are going to be below those standards. And the same story for our biosolids. There is no regulatory requirement or threshold for biosolids. What we have is a draft interim guidance from DNR, sort of helping utilities understand where they fit and what potential might be. We're below all those standards that's going to have any impact on how we operate our land application program, other than those reporting and administrative type of activities identified earlier. All right, so that's our 2022 data, and I just want to give a preview of what's happening in 2023 because we're currently in 2023, so you all know what's still actually going on. The goal of 2023 was to keep getting that temporal monitoring. We had 1 year of sampling quarterly and monthly. That was just 1 year. You know, is it the same every year? We talked about how an influence of high water events or high flows to the plant can have. So we want to keep that temporal monitoring to boost up our data set. So we did that again. We also wanted to make sure that our specific monitoring aligns with the administrative rules and the requirements that we're expected to have in our permit. The administrative rules outline specific monthly calculations and things of how you determine that you're actually meeting the regulations. And so we wanted to make sure that our sampling now aligns with those requirements. So that's what we're doing in 2023. And then we also wanted to continue understanding how PFAS impacts biosolids. So we continue to sample our new pile that we created for Class A in 2023, But in 2023, we're also continuing to sample that 2022 material that we made to have now 2 years worth of data of how a pile sits. Because when we create Class A cake and distribute it, it's not distributed on a specific timeline. So sometimes material sits longer than others. So to continue to understand what time does to how PFAS transform and react is something we wanted to know about. So that's information that I'll be sharing when we have our completed 2023 data, hopefully sometime next year. So this last slide, I just want to put the full timeline up there so we understand what's happening. I just described what happened in 2022 and 2023, what's happening into the future. We do expect to continue our monitoring in 2024 and beyond, so you should expect to see me coming back to the Commission later this year, hopefully in the next month or so, to talk about a contract and authority to have expenditures to continue this monitoring and sampling into the future in 2024 and beyond. So we want to keep increasing our data sets so we have a continuous understanding of how PFAS coming into the plant affects the PFAS leaving, and how any type of intervention, whether it's pollution prevention, source reduction, working with our industrial users, actually will have an impact. There we go. We're at the end of the presentation, so I'd be happy to answer any questions. Thanks.
Okay, Beth, you've got a question?
I do. Thank you, Marty. That was a really good presentation. Good news is that it looks like we're going to do standards, so that's really terrific news. I have some questions. I take it these were composite samples. Is that right?
Oh, good question. Good question. I did not get into that detail. So let's start with the wastewater. For wastewater, because we have 5 individual force mains coming in, we actually took samples from each force main. So those would be, I guess, considered, if you want to consider that a grab sample, right?
But it was grab samples from the force main.
From an individual force main, correct.
Yeah.
So we have 5 force mains, 5 gram samples. We also did a composite sample of the force main. So took the proportion of flow from each force main and actually combined it into one sample receptacle and did that as a test to see if our calculated flow weighted average is actually the same as physically making a composite sample. And show that data, they look identical. Okay. So we actually are doing both when it comes to the liquid. When it comes to solids, that's something we're investigating. So in 2022, they were composite samples. So we took from the pile in different places and then sort of combined that, right? But we were wondering, wait a second, is that going to maybe influence some of these results? So in 2023, we actually took a step back and we're separating our grabs and creating a composite. So now in 2023, when I come back, I'll actually be able to show you 5 different samples from the pile and how they differ, and then how it looks when we combine those all into a composite sample. The answer is both, but that was like a long answer to that.
Okay, good. That's really helpful. Thank you. And
Hey,
then I'm
Marty.
just curious about the accuracy of the data. So you talk about part per trillion levels, and I know that's super small. What is the detection limit for wastewater for that? Are we, like, in other words, way above the detection limit, right at the detection limit? Because that will kind of help us understand the variability.
Yeah, good question. So when you actually look in the report that was attached in the actual data, you'll see qualifiers and flags on exactly what you're talking about, detection level. So for a lot of the data, especially biosolids data, which is very difficult to obtain, we're really right at the level of detection.
Okay.
So you'll see some qualifiers in the data that show that, we're above level of detection, above the level of quantification, but below a level of detection, right? So you're sort of in this middle ground of like, it's as accurate as the instrument can tell us it is, but it's such low amounts and such tiny amounts that we can't be 100% accurate.
So there's some variability in the data that we have to be aware of.
I wouldn't say it's variability, it's more of vision.
Yeah.
Right?
Okay.
it's as precise as the instruments can measure at that level. But when you compare it to a known sample, it may not be as precise, right? But variability, I think, is what it is. I don't think that has to do anything with the small amount. I think the numbers are right, they're correct, but in terms of how exactly accurate they are, you know, that's where some of the flags come in. Level detection, level quantification.
Run like spiked samples for contamination?
Oh yeah, of course. Run spikes, run blanks, run everything to make sure to have that comparison. And we actually have our consultants do a full QA/QC check on the lab data as it comes in, according to all those things you talk about, to make sure we're confident in what we're having. So.
Okay. And
Marty, just real quick, Marty, just so you know, Mike Urson is on the call in case you had questions.
Yes, thank you. Oh, well, I think we're good.
Yeah, thank you. You answered all those questions. That's great.
Unless, Mike, I said something wrong. Please jump in, but.
There was one point of clarification that I did want to make.
Thank you.
Yeah, with respect to the, holy cow, my video looks terrible. Hopefully you can see me. With respect to the question regarding grab versus composite samples, the influent and effluent samples were collected from the, they are composite samplers that run throughout the course of a day over a 24-hour period. So those are technically composited samples, and that's consistent with what the district does on a daily basis for routine monitoring. So we are pairing with the regular routine monitoring during that PFAS sampling effort, and our split sampling off of that.
Thank you, Mike.
Yeah, good. That's great. And then just one more general question. What do we know as far as publications on partitioning and removal of these compounds? I mean, are our results kind of in line with what published?
I want to make sure I understand your question. You asked about removal.
So removal during wastewater treatment, so.
Oh, yes. So compared to like other wastewater treatment plants that don't have any specific manufacturers or known industry that's pumping PFAS, what are our effluent results look like compared to other treatment plant effluent results? We're right in line with that. Unfortunately, there's not tons of studies out there that look at effluent treatment plant results that are pretty holistic. We have that one Michigan study, there's a few more out there, but we're definitely right in the middle and in line with exactly what you'd expect from our makeup of our service area, because it's the same as other treatment plants that have the same thing. So you can kind of look at it as community background, you know, so to speak.
Then just one last question.
Of course.
Has anybody studied the ability to remove some of these compounds during wastewater treatment? I mean, is there anything out there that says, gee, they can be removed?
Well, so yes, there's treatment technologies that can remove PFAS compounds. There's granulated activated carbon, there's other filtration, reverse osmosis, there's things that can actually do it. I think our barrier is if we had a driver to actually try to reduce to zero, the volume that we deal with here probably makes it cost prohibitive. We're looking at same type of studies we did for reverse osmosis for chloride removal. I mean, that's the exact same tech, so we can kind of look at those studies as a guideline as to like what that cost would be. I think NACWA in Minnesota and others have been doing sort of these full utility cost estimates of removal, and it's very, very cost prohibitive. So that's why the focus really is on this source reduction, pollution prevention sort of aspect of stopping it coming to the plant, because we're in the middle of the circle instead of us trying to treat from the middle of the circle that comes out in the environment. So there's definitely treatment technologies that work, and I can tell you from the drinking water side, when those regulations come down and have requirements for levels, that is what they will have to do. So it exists, it's just very expensive and hard to do.
Thank you.
Okay, anyone else have any questions? Greg?
Hi, Marty. Just a quick question here. For your Class A biosolids, who are the main customers for that? So I'm thinking in my head, I'm originally from the southeast part of the state, right? So Milwaukee Met has Milorganite, right, which is a bag product and sold commercially to anyone. So meeting those that in-between guidance you were talking about, you know, you're above the low threshold, but above the, what I would call, I guess, the full regulatory threshold, would probably produce some difficulties for Milwaukee Met. And I'm wondering who is the main customer for our Class A biocell?
Yeah, so our Class A program isn't, I'd say, a program. It's more of understanding and learning if people even like Class A cake to actually use it in their farming operations as like a soil amendment. And so we produce not tons of it, and we distribute not tons of it. So, you know, we have like a handful of farmers, like 3 to 4, that actually have the equipment, are able to handle it, it works for their operation, and they kind of like it. And so that's sort of a core group. We produce, you know, a little bit every year, and we always ask them, hey, do you still want some? Do you still like it? And they love it, and they'll take it. But we haven't really said, this is our Class A product that we want to fully go on and expand out and say this is what everyone loves, because that's not the case. Found a few folks that do like it and can work with it, but we're actively sort of searching and still researching what would be the best Class A product, like a Milorganite that could have a larger, broader distribution. So it's a very, very small handful of folks right now.
Ken?
Marty, are the samples taken on the effluent after the UV?
Yes.
Yeah, I was interested in the 2 spikes from the force main data, and there seemed to be one in maybe July and another one in September, and it, I think it, all of the force mains found kind of intriguing, correlated with flows to
the September spike, yeah.
Which are driven by water use and maybe, or what? Any idea?
So
why?
for the September, yeah, for the September one, it was definitely rain, increased flows. For the June one, we didn't actually have that situation. It was just spike. Now, when you look at the scale, it was a spike of like maybe 2 parts per trillion. So, you know, using the word spike might be a little overzealous. But it just shows the monthly variability, and that there are a lot of factors that come into play. So it's not just, you know, but the September one, we definitely could correlate to higher wet weather, and that was a much taller. But that was a question of the data that, you know, this is what data shows us, and we're like, oh, we're not quite sure exactly what happened in June, but within the variability that we would expect.
Kind of following up on that, we have the regulation from the Wisconsin DNR for effluent and effluent, or is it just effluent?
Just effluent.
Just effluent, okay. So obviously then we have to test, do they standardize how often and or when you have to test? Or how many times a year, or when during the year, or are there certain events that trigger it, or?
So all those details are outlined in the rule, and that's what we're trying to do this year in 2023 to make sure our sampling aligns with what they outlined. So I believe it's a monthly number. I'm not sure. And now this is where I'm not looking at the permit now. So this is by memory. In our permit, we have parameters that have weekly, daily, and monthly. I do believe PFA and PFOS is a monthly limit. Don't quote me on that, but that's sort of what we're investigating. Like, how do we calculate that? When do you take the sample in a month? If you have 3 samples in a month, how does that work?
Do you average them or whatever?
Right.
Okay. And then another question I had is, knowing that there'll be something coming with biosolids, and, you know, I was here on the commission when we started the Class A product, and the idea of and we kind of, like you indicated, kind of still experimenting with it. And the idea was at some point we may have to move more to Class A due to the lack of availability of appropriate farmland to be spreading the biosolids on. And So I think this is really interesting how you do see that spike, and we're a little bit between the 20 and the 50. But that raised a question in my mind, are we going to look to see because I don't know that we want to necessarily drop the whole Class A process because of the whole land availability issue. What's going to happen in the future, we have to be prepared. But do you think we'll look at to see, is there anything in the process that we can change to reduce that effect of increasing the level in the Class A, or is that just like pie in the sky kind of thinking?
Well, there's nothing in the process we can change. So this data is meant to illustrate what we're learning about what our process does. So we can say, okay, if we know the process hates precursors because it's going to use those precursors to spike us up, then we need to stop those precursors from coming, right? So it sort of helps us better target types of compounds coming in. I think more realistically, and this is exactly what we're planning to do, you'll see when we come for the 2024 and beyond proposal, is to examine all the different types of Class A products that are out there and say, what is the impact of PFAS on those? Whether it's getting pilots or getting samples from somebody else that does it, or learning that, because we just have our own cake product. One type of product, one type of process. We know we can't change how we make it. We're learning about what the impacts of PFAS are on it. But we can also examine these multitude of other Class A products and how that is related to PFAS. And that's the first step, to understand, okay, maybe our cake is cool. Maybe it's actually lowest of all the different Class A's, or maybe actually there's other Class A's that have a different process that actually doesn't impact as much with the precursor situation. That's definitely, you'll see in the proposal for 2024 and beyond that we want to look at.
Okay, thank you. Anyone else? Paul?
Just a note of context, since I work with state. This is an amazing report, and I'm not sure you know how amazing this is. There are very few plants around the state that are doing any testing, and I'm aware of none that have done level of both influent, effluent, biosolid samples are way ahead of the curve. And, even from the regulatory standpoint, monitoring requirements and so forth, they're going to start putting those in permits. Aren't any permits that I just think that what we've seen here is a remarkable level of understanding.
Here, here.
Thank you very much.
I was going to say something similar.
Okay. Thanks, Ezra. So anybody else have anything on this item? Okay, seeing or hearing none, we'll move on to the Chief Engineer and Director's report. Michael?
Things to report. We had a treatment facility overflow and a sanitary sewer overflow. I'm waiting to see which one pops up first. This is a treatment facility overflow. This happened on September 18th, and this was discovered in the afternoon. It came out of one of our access hatches in digester 4, and is estimated to be about 40 gallons. These are quickly cleaned up and mitigated, and they don't go anywhere. They don't go outside the plant or into water bodies. And then we submit notice to the. Next one is a sanitary sewer overflow of treated effluent. So this is in our return line to Badger Mill Creek. And this also happened on September 18th, busy day. And we received notice from the city of Fitchburg of this water, which is treated effluent. And we responded immediately and actually implemented our incident command system training to coordinate and limit the impacts of the event. There were approximately 33,000 gallons of treated effluent released to the Road Storm Sewer and then Dunn's Marsh. And we shut off the system immediately. and then did a progressive startup. Belief is that the unexpected shut-off caused the pipe to become airbound in our operations. Sudden full flow return to service caused air to restrict the pipe's flow capacity, forcing out and then released. So that's our best idea of what happened. And
Michael, Todd Giebert is on the virtual and raised his hand. I believe he has something to add.
excellent. Todd, please.
Oh, I'm sorry, I did that by mistake.
And if you have other questions during the operations report, Alan or Eric can elaborate. That's my report.
Okay, then we'll move to the Badger Mill Stakeholder Group. Amanda?
Yeah, good morning, Commissioners. Amanda Wagner, Communications and Public Affairs Director here at the district. So I'm going to give you a brief update on the stakeholder group, which kicked off last week, just to bring you up to speed over the last couple months. So just I realize I forgot to change that picture. But a quick review of how we got here. So as you recall, back at the May 25th meeting, we made a decision on the final phosphorus compliant solution for Badger Mill Creek, discontinuing the flow to Badger Mill Creek, but also committed $1 million in funding to support Badger Mill Creek, and specifically pulling together a stakeholder group to determine projects to utilize that $1 million. So we did post an RFP in early July, had a pretty quick turnaround on it, but we did receive 3 responses, and you did approve that contract back in late July, early August. We selected EOR, Inc., which you may be familiar with. They worked with us during the earlier phase of the process to complete an in-stream assessment. And one of the key reasons we chose EOR is because they're partnering with a local facilitator, Allison Leibwell, which I'll introduce her here in a moment on the next screen. We started our initial planning with EOR in August and started rolling out invitations to stakeholder participants. And then just last week, Wednesday, we held our kickoff meeting at the Verona Senior Center. So just to introduce you to the facilitation team. So Allison, as I mentioned, is our facilitator. She's got lots of experience with facilitating groups and helping to move groups through challenging conversations. 2 of her latest facilitations are the Yahara Clean Compact, which some individuals here may have participated in, and then also facilitated the Wisconsin Department of Transportation's Transportation Task Force. And she came well recommended. The project manager for EOR is Mike Rupiper. You may be familiar with his name. He spent almost 2 decades at CARPC and recently moved over to EOR. Lots of experience in civil and environmental engineering, and an emphasis on watershed and climate resilience planning, which aligns really well with Badger Mill Creek. Here, the visual representation of the stakeholder group participants rather. So they sort of fall into 2 categories. So nonprofits, non-governmental organizations that have an interest in the stewardship and preservation of Badger Mill Creek and the Badger Mill Creek corridor, as well as government agencies and organizations that have some sort of regulatory oversight or responsibility for maintenance within Badger Mill Creek and within Badger Mill Creek. So we've got Town and City of Verona, City of Fitchburg, City of Madison. DNR is part of that group, as well as the county. Upper Sugar River, Trout Unlimited, the Southern Wisconsin chapter, and Friends of Badger Mill Creek are our nonprofit partners. And then the district is part of the stakeholder group as well. So just kind of this process will run for a year. As part of the resolution, we committed to kicking this off before September 30th, so we check the box on that. And so moving forward, we think about the schedule in sort of three pieces. So the first three meetings, in addition to the kickoff, is really about setting up the group for success. So establishing shared goals, understanding the state of the corridor, and really just bringing all of the participants together to move forward with this collaboration. We are, as part of the RFP, EOR did propose 2 larger community meetings, which was another piece of their proposal that we really liked. And so we are anticipating our first community meeting in early November. We have not locked in the date for that, but we'll certainly let commission and interested parties know. And then kind of the phase 2 block of meetings is really technical discussions. So we'll be bringing in technical experts to really understand more of the biology, the fisheries, all of those sort of things in the corridor. We are anticipating our second community meeting in April of next year. And then phase 3 is really where sleeves start to roll up, and the group will start to develop and refine their project portfolio that they will bring here to the commission about a year from now, a little less from a year from now, on Thursday, September 12th, 2024. So as I mentioned, we had our kickoff meeting last week. That's Commissioner Freeze right there, who is part of the stakeholder group representing the city of Madison. That is key. One of the questions that our facilitator asked, let me step back 1 minute. It was a 2-hour meeting, spent a lot of time just kind of acquainting ourselves with one another, kind of sharing our vision and our hopes, what the connection to water is, and then also kind of doing perfunctory things like walking through the draft charter, operating agreements, and things like that. But one question that Allison, the facilitator, asked was, if this project is successful, what can we say at the end? And so 3 kind of key bullet points came up. One was to have a durable long-term fix for Badger Mill Creek. The second is to have a solid plan with support of all stakeholders. And then the third, and this is really important and I want to emphasize here, is have or begin to rebuild trust and have confidence we can work together in the future. And that theme of trust is one that I want to speak a little bit more about today. That really came up in the meeting last Wednesday, and several of the participants in the group named the elephant in the room in terms of their frustration and concern over the process. And so that will be something that we look to rebuilding that trust and ensuring that we can, as bullet point 3 here emphasizes, that we can continue to collaborate and move forward from there. Another theme that came up, less so, but important one I want to mention here this morning, is some fear about what happens next September when they bring their recommended project portfolio to the district. So their hope is that the commission understands kind of the work and the passion that went into that and helps to move that forward without too much nitpicking or kind of pulling it apart. So just wanted to kind of point those 2 things out there. So we have our next meeting on October 18th, our meeting the 3rd Wednesday of most months of the year through next August. And then again, as I mentioned, next September, we'll be back here with that recommended project portfolio. So any questions on Badger Mill Creek? One thing I realized I just forgot to mention or add is that we will be coming back with regular updates in terms of letting the commission know the progress they're making, sort of where the group is heading, so you can anticipate having these updates on a regular basis.
Sarah, you have a question?
Yeah, thanks, Amanda. Super helpful update. Just one question, or maybe just a piece of feedback. When we get to that project plan stage, I think it would be really helpful to be clear on implementation, roles and responsibilities in particular, right? we can have a great project portfolio, but if there's not also a plan for how it's going to get done, I'm worried that we then fall down on the trust piece, because we obviously have to make sure that these things happen in order to rebuild that trust. So I'm sure that's part of the plan, but just want to emphasize the importance of that, and you've got a lot of work ahead of you, so.
Yeah, that is certainly part of the whole considerations. That is not just here are great projects, but who might lead on them? How might they get done? Are there other sources of funding that we might be able to bring to bear to help move that forward? Commissioner Wilson? You might just need to get a little closer to the mic. 1 to 2 inches instead of 3 to 4. That's a great question. So we really identified the, basically those in the jurisdiction, so that's where you see your cities, your towns, and whatnot. The nonprofits, those were organizations that were very active and played a key role. I wasn't sure if it was this mic or not. Were very active during that first phase. Now, one thing I failed to mention is that we are doing a stakeholder map as well, which is basically asking those groups, are there any other voices that should be at the table? So there may possibly be a few late additions, and certainly if you think there are other groups, email me.
Well, what I liked is that you just said that you went through comments that were made during our process, and that's how you determined a lot of this. But I really thought that we heard from both the town of Montrose and the village of Belleville, who were downstream. So I was kind of surprised that they weren't included. They're not, right there, but they're downstream on the Sugar River. So I thought they commented so that may be just worth checking out. That's all I wanted to raise. I just didn't see their logos or anything there.
Yeah, and that's a good point. And I think one point of clarification is that we're very specific about the area that we're working in with Badger Mill Creek, but that's certainly something that I can bring back to the group.
Okay. Anyone else? Okay. Thank you, Amanda. Alan, you have operations report?
I'll just go ahead and sneak in here to Brad's spot. Yes, Alan Groom's operations manager for the district. I'll be giving the August operations report. I was going to say this will be fairly quick and to the point. It's back to normal readings. I was afraid I wouldn't be able to find anything that I considered interesting to comment on, but one that did catch my eye was on the CBOD 5. You'll note that number is well below the historical numbers there at 1.0 milligrams per liter. And when I was looking at that, I kind of queried the lab. Well, could this be right? That's quite low. And the commission may recall that we recently did a changeover in the lab analytical equipment for the CBOD 5. That equipment, I think, was authorized for purchase last year. We made that transition in July, but it didn't show up in the July numbers because we had higher solids kind of masked that transition. So now it's showing up in there that that instrument is reading lower values than the previous instrument was reading somewhat higher. All were within the tolerances and met the quality criteria. But that's if you're seeing that, that's probably the most interesting thing I found on this. Everything else is actually really good numbers. Ammonia was good, nice and low for the month. Phosphorus and solids are back to normal. Everything looks really good. So we'll knock on wood that we keep that going. So I don't know if there are any questions on the operational parameters for the month of August. Okay, thank you.
Thanks, Alan. Regulatory and legal, Paul?
Yes, just a couple of things. So, starting kind of with legal services, really for the month of August, it was another busy month. This is the third month in a row we were. There were some issues associated with district property. We had a number of easement issues we needed to sort through. There was an issue. Continuing to monitor the PFAS updates and reports, as well as the Badger Mill Creek. But also, there were some pretreatment issues. And on the HR side of things, we had some additional inquiries about some employees as witnesses at a trial, and that just took a while to kind of sort out. It was actually busier than it sounded, but that was August. I guess the one thing I'd like to add from a regulatory standpoint, that yesterday at the Natural Resources Board meeting, they did anti-degradation rule. There are still a bunch of steps that need to go forward before it becomes finalized, but I would anticipate happening probably by the end of the year, unless the legislature. I had the chance to testify at the hearing yesterday, and my comment was basically that I want to have this rule impose unnecessary constraints on sanitation and other treatment efficiencies. That if there was a broader set of activities that were now going to be subject to guidance that allowed those types of projects to proceed. Adrian Stocks, who was the president of the department at that meeting, indicated that he would no formal action, but I'm hoping we can get some guidance coming out of that. Subject to anti-deg. Will I have any?
Okay, thank you, Paul. Any questions? Okay, seeing none, we'll move on. Future meeting schedule, that's in the packet. So the next meeting will, was that October 12th, will be in person, where we'll have our discussion on the budget and give the direction, as you saw when Michael was doing his presentation. So everybody remember that. And then the following meeting where we approve the budget will actually be virtual. Just for that, excuse me, any future agenda topics? Any other business? Tom?
I will move we adjourn.
Motion by Commissioner Wilson, second by Commissioner Clark to adjourn. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. No opposed, motion carries. Thank you, everybody.